Thanks to everyone for being here. I hope everyone can hear me without any amplification. Yes, no, maybe, I'm back, good. All right, so today we've got 21 slides, we've got 30 minutes, and the intent is to give you like 5 to 7 minutes for Q&A at the end. What we want to talk about is actually kind of very well said and articulated in a succinct fashion by Andrew. So let's get started. Historically, clinical trial data was a deterministic factor in terms of pharmaceutical market leadership. But now, we're in 2025, in the age of AI, in the age of, as Andrew said, absolute urgency on everything and immediacy. 3 of the 10 highest grossing drug launches in the last 5 years have had significant market access barriers unrelated to the clinical superiority and or their ability to get to market. Now, supply constraints, regulatory divergence, and policy intervention are other kind of key thematics that are affecting things. Historically, head-to-head clinical superiority was a predictor for success and for formulaic positioning of getting your tier 1 or tier 2 positioning. That being said, you need to have the proper manufacturing capacity, pricing policy, and supply sovereignty, meaning you own your supply chain, or have a direct link with the proper CDMOs to ensure no stockouts. And that's overriding what we're considering to be the clinical advantage of the past. The question that is raised now is, who has the best data? No, but rather, who can produce, supply, and defend their market position in an increasingly fragmented geopolitical environment. And this has to do with everything from choke points, be it geopolitical conflicts, be it supply chain key starting materials, be it the Defense Production Act in the US getting things done in the US, be it biosecure, etc. So competition operates on 3 key vectors that we see. And it's simultaneous and strategically, we want to have market leadership in the end. So we have science with capacity with sovereignty. Science, as we all know, because most of us have PhDs, PharmDs, or MDs, is the clinical innovation, therapeutic displacement, pipeline sequencing, and mechanism of action adoption. How do we get innovation into the clinic and into the patient? Capacity, on the other hand, is something a little bit different that historically affected more commoditized products, be they small molecule generics or vaccines. Now, however, manufacturing scale, API supply connection, the control, ownership, and or exclusivity of CDMOs and device production, as well as cold chain infrastructure are key in an increasingly complex world where we're dealing with both complex biologics and next generation modalities such as radioligand therapies, cell and gene, TCEs, T-cell engagers, ADCs, etc. Sovereignty, the governments. So whether it's the US, the European Union, individual governments, China, etc., we're looking at intervention through tariffs, onshoring mandates, industrial policy, regulatory acceleration, and strategic drug stockpiling. The United States, for example, is in the process of continuing a sovereignty exercise where, for national security purposes, key types of medicines, be they antibiotics, antivirals, antitoxins, are being stored, as well as certain select vaccines for anti-anthrax and other types of bioweaponry. So this is another key override that is new. When we look at the failures, we can have a couple of case studies here. GLP-1s, I think everyone's aware of the importance of GLP-1 as an analog, okay? Demand exceeds manufacturing capacity by over 18 months historically. Converting supply security to primary competitive differentiator regardless of the clinical profile and differences between and among products. So I see that there's some people from Novo Nordisk in the room. I think that you're very intimately aware of the need to acquire Catalent so as to secure that sovereignty of supply chain and ensure market positioning, market access, etc. Because not being able to bring and deliver the proper supply of product to market is a de facto major issue. Biosimilars. So regulatory and IP strategy divergence is there across different geographies like the US, Europe, and Asia. And therefore, the ability to go to market, the timelines are differentiated by up to 2 to 3 years for clinically and therapeutically equivalent products, making regulatory pathway selection more consequential than the actual bioequivalence data alone. And with radioligand therapies, capacity. Isotope supply concentration and the nuclear pharmacy infrastructure requirements create a capacity issue that limits market entry independent of the clinical efficacy. So if we look to Ares company Novartis in the United States, where they launched Lutathera and Pluvicto, there were significant issues vis-a-vis the ability to supply in real time and appropriately across the different centers. Now, this map that we're trying to build here is about evaluating competition, and we're looking at only about 2/3 of the terrain. So there's about 1/3 that's kind of fog of war. Evidence is your standard types of PharmaCI assessments, clinical trial trackers, and what's the TPP difference, and price and reimbursement analysis of public pricing, because if you start doing primary CI and pricing, you get into questionable ground on antitrust and competition purposes. All three are science-centric or market-centric, but none is systemically incorporating the manufacturing risk or geopolitical intervention, which are key today. Capacity can be anything from CDMO contracts, supply chain mapping, to API sourcing, devices, fill finish, and is managed by supply chain functions, typically not competitive intelligence per se. They do, however, oftentimes want to build maps and will engage through the CI function to get that type of data. And last, when we look at this from a pure play geopolitical risk perspective, the sovereignty signals, be they tariffs, onshoring, regulatory acceleration, like what just happened with the FDA the other day, AI to accelerate clinical trials, real time, etc., are absent from the majority of competitive intelligence feeds. You might get a dashboard with AI with a newsletter that this is happening, blah, 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 but actually having a tease out and understanding of what it means to you and to the competition and broadly to the market is missing. So, with this funky graphic here, this little triangle, I always like to put a triangle in my presentations because the triangle is the most actually sophisticated but simple structure on the planet. If you think about it, you have 3 legs, like a tripod. Why do you have a tripod, not a bipod, not a quadrupod? 3 legs is the most solid structure to keep things up. So we're going to use this triangle. Okay? Size, sovereignty, capacity. When we look at this from the market outcome shifting perspective, there's not one single vector that is going to win you or lose you the competition. It's really the interplay of all 3, such that you have science and capacity, science and sovereignty, and all 3 combined stage 3. But phase 3 is understanding the gestalt layers that are second and third order thinking, integrating everything else. Here we're looking at therapeutic displacement compressed to the point where first mover advantage in science lasts less than 24 months. Things are happening rather rapidly now. Follow-on compounds, next generation, next generation, etc. And it's only going to increase in terms of the velocity and ferocity as new accommodations are being made by the FDA, and likely we'll have to have concessions in Europe from EMA, because if you know, such CEOs as Voss Nishmathan and from Roche did state publicly that there are major issues vis-a-vis the most favored nation policy and how that's going to affect ability to supply new innovative pharmaceuticals to the European market. So there has to be some catch up there as well. Here we're looking at ADC portfolio competition as well as radioligand therapy. The ADC example, first gen ADCs achieved approval. Now there's second generation assets with superior payload linker chemistry, higher therapeutic indices, and broader indication potential. The displacement cycle from first to second generation was about 7 to 10 years historically, but in this case was anywhere from 3 to 5 years. In RLTs, the initial market entrance from Novartis faced rapid follow-on competition from next generation actinium and from lead, 212. improved targeting vectors and combination approaches that could demonstrate both clinical superiority and also cost effectiveness in the case of the lead assets. And lastly, strategically, when you're looking at this for your internal clients from an R&D perspective, investment in any one given mechanism, modality, or TA is a depreciating asset. Why? Because portfolio sequencing and pipeline velocity now matter more than any individual asset, MOA, or therapy area. So talk about portfolio sequencing. It's replaced individual asset superiority as a primary scientific competitive strategy. Pharma companies that are achieving first mover advantage in maintaining competitive readiness and situational awareness are approaching things portfolio-wide. The CI implication being monitoring individual pipeline assets misses the picture. It is a narrow, myopic view. When we look at intelligence, we need to look at portfolio and enterprise level sequencing to understand what is next, and what is next. Now, in the words of Donald Rumsfeld, who's a former Department of Defense lead for the United States, there are knowns, there are known unknowns, there are unknowns, and there are unknown unknowns. In this case, we're trying to solve for the unknown knowns and the unknown unknowns, trying to get a map of where the competitors will go so we can be in either go decision, no-go decision, red, green, based on what's going to happen. In terms of capacity, again, we've seen the GLP-1 market fight with the demand outstripping the capacity, biologics manufacturing, where API production of complex biologics is concentrated among fewer than 10 global CDMOs, one of which is a key China player, WuXi, and based on, again, Biosecure Act in the US, there are questionable considerations with respect to the ability to bring those products to the US market for those US-centric individuals. Europe is not necessarily affected as such. Strategically, your contracts with CDMOs, for your internal stakeholders, for enterprise, facility investments, and API supply agreements are now critical supply competitive intelligence signals of equal impact to what would otherwise be normally your therapeutic area or baseline commercial strategy benchmark. In terms of who wins, so organizations that secure manufacturing earliest in the GLP-1 market convert supply advantage into durable market leadership. Let's look at a case study. Look at Novo and Lilly, the two key players in the GLP-1 space in regulated markets. Novo was doing extremely well in the US and in Europe as a market leader. Even when Lilly launched tirzepatide, Zepbound, Mounjaro. Now, the issue was the chokehold of supply. So Lilly was able to maintain that, and with orforglipron, which is now approved in the US as Foundayo, they pre-manufactured at risk massive quantities of finished drug that would be able to be packaged and sent into the market within days of approval. So you're not just getting the regulatory supply there, you're getting a massive commercial supply at risk. Why did they do that? Because they wanted to ensure that they would usurp such an issue again, where you would run out of stock and it has a negative optics perspective. And also, for the avoidance of doubt, in the United States, there's something called compounding. There are different pharmacies that are taking just the API and putting it together, not the official formulation from Lilly or Novo, but doing that on their own. And the FDA did give a temporary kind of okay, green light to this, given the severity of the stock out. Nationally, governments are treating strategic pharmaceutical inventory and pipeline and portfolios across pharma companies as actual national security assets and de-risking of critical events. So in the event, let's say that there were another COVID, okay? You have something shuts down global transportation, shuts down everything. The United States wants to have a strategic supply, just like it has a strategic oil reserve, of critical medicines essential. That's everything from augmentin, amoxicillin, clavulanic acid, to the different types of anti-flu agents, as well as vaccines, as well as critical medicines for diabetes, hypertension, etc. Why? Because if there's a major issue, be it the Strait of Hormuz closes and you're not able to get the supply chain from India and from China over to the US in time, or what? You have the right medicines there that you can release on an as-needed basis. Tariff and trade policy, obviously, is a key hot-button issue these days, where the United States is issuing reciprocal tariffs on broad-based indexes as well as on pharmaceuticals. And that is something I'm not going to get into detail on today, but we're happy to talk about it afterwards. Onshoring mandates, where the United States is issuing mandates for investment in the United States to negotiate better pricing so you can command better pricing and actually have access to the US. You pay to play. And strategic regulatory acceleration. Presentation was made before the FDA made these announcements, but literally I think it was yesterday that Marty McClary made it clear that there's an acceleration of clinical trials so you can get new innovations to market faster. And I'm not talking about the one clinical trial for pivotal, I'm talking about an actual real-time trial data registry. Biosecurity legislation, I'm going to skip this in favor of getting to the questions, so we kind of discuss this. Our collision signals, so when we look at this, there's science, capacity, sovereignty, again, the triangle. But we overlap it in terms of the Venn diagram, we have a critical collision zone in the center. This is a hypothetical. A radioligand therapy where isotope supply, government stockpiling, policy, and clinical superiority interact simultaneously. That is one of the issues that we would potentially face. And given the sensitivity of radioisotope production, that's one of the areas where you can see a real issue come. This is kind of the unpack of that. We look at the examples, science and capability, and capacity, ADC, full triple overlaps radioligands, the capacity and sovereignty is the GLP-1 example, which we've discussed, and ultimately, trying to solve for these with competitive intelligence, so you know what's going to happen, hopefully, in advance, is able to predict and also de-risk with the weighted scenario planning what you want to do, how you place your bets, what you want to have a backup of, etc. Elite intelligence organizations, we get the question all the time, what makes a good CI function, what makes a good CI operation within a company? So, pipeline updates, great, you need that no matter what. AI can do about 92, 95% of that with minimal to moderate oversight from the human in the loop. Leadership changes and earnings calls are also public records where you can get definitive signals. And that should be monitored both by a human and also from an AI platform as well. It's actual reactive intelligence that's taking into effect what's happened, and you can have some kind of near real-time responsivity. When we look to the shift of what the future is, though, with these vectors, it's not something that you're going to be able to track in real time until it's too late, because it takes months to secure the supply and years to secure contracts or build the CapEx for the greenfield project. So you need to do other types of intelligence, be it modeling or human intelligence, primary CI, to understand what's going on behind the scenes, what competitors are doing, what different agencies or payers want for the future, et cetera, and then you can make your appropriate investments or non-investments accordingly. In terms of strategic foresight, there's monitoring. We look at it from a CI, supply chain government affairs perspective, and that all allows you to get ahead of this collision signal. In terms of your portfolio, this is really for the pharma clients in the room. You have an exposure matrix. There's science, capacity, sovereignty, biologics, GLP-1s, and radioligands, examples here. The science is most exposed to the biologic perspective. When you look at the radioligands, it's about the sovereignty and as well as with the GLP-1s. So when you look at the exposure ratios, what you need to do to maintain actual market leadership, that's there. Here we're looking at M&A evaluation, geographic expansion, manufacturing investment. Again, long horizon type of initiatives and investments. You can't just rapidly respond and say, well, we heard that company X is buying company Y for $2 billion, and therefore we want to buy this company. Unless you have the talks, you're in deep diligence, you're in 2A negotiations, you're in the data room, not gonna be turnkey. So this is stuff you need to know way in advance. Same thing for your geographic expansion. Say you want to put a play in China or MENA or wherever it might be, you don't have a presence there. You can't just overnight say we're opening a China operation and expect to hire leadership and a field team. Leaders who adopt this type of a structure or strategy typically are able to get ahead of the 8 ball. I can't promise you success because that would be a misrepresentation. But if you're able to incorporate into your competitive intelligence this type of view as well, this cut, it certainly helps you be ready and able to answer those rapid fire questions from the chief of staff or your CEO or your VPs in strategy and commercialization. So my little statement here, information is no longer an advantage, foresight is. It's not just about supplying, yeah, this is great, we know this is what happened from the AI perspective, but rather, what do we need to know ahead of it actually happening and hitting the market? And with that, I will take questions and answer you as much as possible. And to that point, Aligned Intelligence, where AI ends, we begin.
Thank you very much, Dave. Are there any questions in the room?
So Dave, maybe I'll kick it off that.
Sure.
Very interesting presentation.
Thank you.
Thinking about the collision zone and thinking about it from a pharma perspective at a large pharma. I know you started to get into this with a few of the slides, but how would you advise avoiding that collision zone beyond just building out redundancies or looking to geographic expansion?
So I think there's a couple of things. Actually knowing, so based on pipeline intelligence, we know who or what should be coming with weighted probabilities of regulatory and technical success. We know who's in the market. We want to also understand across markets what the kind of market access perspective is, who's going to have positioning, et cetera, understanding their manufacturing posture, readiness, and scalability. If we know that and we know where we sit, we'll be able to accordingly, say, we know we can't go to a third-tier market in Europe to supply, we're going to divert that to the US only, or whatnot. Redundancy is obviously great, but it's heavy CapEx, and in this age, it's hard to get the approvals and signatures to get that investment. But having a cogent argument for why you need to do X instead of Y, or this is what we would need to do Z, I think goes a long way with leadership. So you're not just saying we can't do it, we're saying we have a solution enablement for you, or another option for investment.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Any other questions for Dave? If not, there we go. Excellent. Saved me having to invent something.
To what level of granularity can we now already be mapping competitors' future capacity in spaces?
So that's going to depend on who you are as a company, what your company DNA is, and also what you're producing. Are you producing something in a competitive space, or are you the single asset in market? Are there generics, or are there biosimilars? So you have to take that into consideration. In a market, and also you have to look at the actual epidemiology and population health version of this. So let's take something like, ASCVD. It's a mass market condition. There's a huge unmet need, even though a lot of people are on LLAs, but there's a lot of unmet need. We have generics all over the place. We have biologic molecules, and we have new CERNAs and ASAs coming into the fold as well. Okay? So for that, I would say we need to know how many lives are actually addressable in whatever markets we're going to play in. What is the actual total addressable market? Do the math, what's the unmet need? And then look at it from a guidelines perspective and say, for Lp(a), for example, we need to do 20 million doses a month for the US and X million doses for Europe, et cetera. And then you say, well, we know that this other company is going to come in 18 months trailing. Therefore, we need to have anchoring in ownership and already have the preceding of the market to be able to ensure that we have a competitive hedge, right? So you want to have that, and you want to have the advantage of having plenty of product in the market, so the other company can't come in and take your patients. You ring fence it. Does that make sense?
Any other questions? We still have time. Maybe a comment from my side then. I appreciate the great presentation. Thank you, Dave. And it's an interesting subject to bring up things, where CI could also have a greater impact. Like I said in my little intro, it's not just about the drug, it's how companies are executing. And I think that things like manufacturing, supply chain, CI is often overlooked. We're getting questions occasionally because people don't know where to turn to, or they don't know how to find this information out. And I think oftentimes we leave it too late to start thinking about that or looking into it. I don't know if that's something that maybe especially the vendor community is experiencing as well, a broader variety of the engagements that you have. It's not just about the drugs or the launch anymore. It's much more strategic and much earlier. Would you say that's a fair comment?
I think that's a very fair comment. I think that, post 2024, when AI adoption became more piloted and scaled up, a lot of the traditional competitive monitoring and clinical type of analyses have been relegated to an AI loop with a human. I'm not saying that's good or bad, this is not the point of the talk today. But from our vantage point, we've gotten a lot more enterprise level strategic intelligence projects where we're working either in a silo alongside like a Clearview, McKinsey, BCG, Bain, or actually teaming up with them to provide intelligence, primary intelligence, working with them to understand what it means for the client and for their kind of LROP or long range operational plan, LRP, whatever you want to call it. So I definitely see that.